What if we've all been asking the wrong question about Doctor Doom? Ever since Marvel officially revealed that Victor Von Doom is stepping into the multiverse saga, almost every theory has focused on one mystery. Where has he been all this time? Why hasn't anyone mentioned him? Why would someone this powerful suddenly appear at the very end of the MCU? Those are good questions. But maybe they're all based on one assumption that was never true to begin with. We've been searching for Doom in the present. We've been looking for clues hidden somewhere in today's MCU timeline, expecting him to be another genius who has secretly existed alongside Tony Stark, Reed Richards, or Doctor Strange. But what if that's exactly where we're supposed to fail? What if Doctor Doom isn't missing from the present because he's been hiding, but because he doesn't belong here at all? Imagine that the real Victor Von Doom doesn't come from our era. He doesn't come from today's Earth. He doesn't even come from the next generation of heroes. Instead, he comes from a civilization so far into the future that, from our perspective, it almost feels mythical. A future where humanity has already solved problems we can't even comprehend. A future where science has evolved beyond imagination. Magic has become a perfected discipline, and one man stands above everyone else. Not as a dictator hungry for power, but as the ruler of what he genuinely believes is the greatest civilization ever created. And if that's true, then suddenly, Doctor Doom isn't arriving to conquer history. He's returning to protect it. More specifically, to protect his own future before it disappears forever. That completely changes the way we should be looking at this character. Because if Doom truly comes from centuries ahead of the current MCU timeline, then everything we know about him starts looking different. We stop asking why he waited so long to appear. Instead, we ask why this exact moment in history matters so much that he was willing to travel all the way back to it. That's a very different mystery. And strangely enough, Marvel may have already shown us the answer years ago without anyone realizing it. Think back to Avengers Endgame. For most fans, the time heist has always been remembered as one of the greatest victories in MCU history. Earth's mightiest heroes traveled through time, recovered the Infinity Stones, defeated Thanos, and restored half the universe. It feels like a perfect ending. Every emotional payoff landed, every sacrifice mattered. Every timeline seemed to be cleaned up by Steve Rogers before the credits rolled, case closed, or at least that's what we believed, because the more you look at Endgame through the lens of the multiverse saga, the harder it becomes to believe that history simply moved on without consequences. At first, those consequences look surprisingly small. During the mission to New York in 2012, one unexpected mistake changed everything. Loki escaped with the Tesseract. At the time, it almost felt like a fun callback. An accident, a clever way to surprise the audience, but Marvel later revealed that this wasn't just another funny moment. That single decision became the beginning of an entirely different story. Loki's escape led directly to the TVA. The TVA led to He Who Remains. His death shattered the illusion of one sacred timeline, and suddenly the MCU wasn't operating under one controlled reality anymore. Every possibility that had once been pruned was now allowed to exist. Infinite branches spread across existence faster than anyone could imagine. The multiverse was no longer a theory, it became the new foundation of reality itself. The Avengers never witnessed the true consequences of what happened. They returned home believing they had saved everything. From their perspective, they had. The universe celebrated them as heroes. Nobody had any reason to suspect that the biggest impact of the time heist hadn't even begun yet. Now here's where this theory starts becoming fascinating. We naturally assume that if someone changes history, the consequences should appear immediately. That's how most time travel stories work. You step on a butterfly, and within moments, the timeline changes around you. But the MCU has repeatedly suggested that reality doesn't function that way. Instead of instantly rewriting everything, branching timelines continue to grow independently. Every branch creates new decisions. Those decisions create more branches. Every universe evolves differently. Every civilization follows its own path. New heroes are born. Different villains rise. Entire histories separate from one another. At first, those differences might seem insignificant. One person survives, another dies. A war begins earlier. A scientific discovery happens decades sooner. None of it feels world-ending. But multiply those tiny differences across hundreds, then thousands, then millions of universes over hundreds of years, and something extraordinary begins to happen. Those timelines don't simply exist beside one another forever. They begin interacting, pressuring one another, eventually colliding. The multiverse itself starts carrying the weight of infinite possibilities that were never meant to coexist peacefully forever. And that's exactly where the idea of incursions enters the picture. Marvel has already established incursions as catastrophic events where two universes collide until one, or sometimes both, are destroyed. They're not just random disasters, they're symptoms of a multiverse that has become unstable. The important question has never been whether incursions exist. We already know they do. The real question is why they become so frequent. What caused reality itself to become so fragile? Maybe the answer isn't a single universe doing something wrong. Maybe it's the accumulation of countless branching histories stretching across centuries until the multiverse reaches a breaking point. Like a crack forming inside glass, the damage remains invisible for years before suddenly shattering all at once. If that's true, then the Avengers didn't accidentally destroy reality overnight. They unknowingly planted the first seed, a seed that needed centuries to fully grow, which means the true explosion of the time heist wouldn't happen in 2023. It wouldn't happen during Loki. It wouldn't even happen during the lives of today's Avengers. It would happen hundreds of years later, in someone else's future. Now imagine living in that future. Imagine humanity surviving for centuries beyond anything we've seen in the MCU. Technology no longer resembles machines. Magic is no longer mysterious. Entire civilizations operate on knowledge that would look impossible to us today. Somewhere within that distant future stands Latveria. But it isn't simply a small European nation anymore. Under Victor Von Doom, it has evolved into something almost unimaginable, a civilization built on absolute order, scientific breakthroughs beyond Tony Stark's greatest inventions, mystical understanding rivaling the greatest sorcerers. A society that has overcome wars, economic collapse, and political instability because one ruler refused to allow chaos to exist. People often reduce Doom to a man obsessed with power. But what if, after centuries of leadership, history itself proves him right? What if his empire genuinely becomes the safest, most advanced civilization humanity has ever achieved? His family survives. His legacy continues. Generations are born under stability instead of fear. Entire worlds recognize the influence of Doom's civilization. From his perspective, he hasn't created oppression. He's created perfection. Whether everyone agrees with him almost becomes irrelevant because to him, the results speak for themselves. Then something impossible begins happening. Entire universes start disappearing. Worlds that had existed peacefully for centuries suddenly collide with realities they never knew existed. Planets vanish. Civilizations collapse overnight. Histories are erased before anyone fully understands what's happening. Every solution only delays the inevitable. Every incursion grows larger than the last. Imagine ruling over the greatest civilization ever built while realizing that nothing, not your armies, not your science, not your magic, can stop reality itself from collapsing. That isn't simply a political crisis, it's existential horror. Doom watches generations of work begin falling apart because of a disaster that seems to have no beginning. His people don't understand why it's happening. His enemies can't explain it. Even the greatest minds of his era fail to identify the true source. But Victor Von Doom isn't like everyone else. He refuses to accept that the universe can simply collapse without a reason. Somewhere, there has to be an origin. Somewhere, there has to be a first domino. And if anyone in Marvel is capable of finding that domino, it's Doctor Doom. This is the man whose greatest weapon has never been his armor. It's his mind. A mind willing to cross boundaries that other geniuses consider impossible. Tony Stark solved impossible engineering problems. Reed Richards solves impossible scientific equations. Stephen Strange explores impossible mystical dimensions. Doom has always been terrifying because he refuses to choose between those worlds. He embraces both. Science and sorcery become two halves of the same equation. So instead of merely studying incursions, imagine Doom doing something no one else ever attempted: mapping history itself. Comparing thousands of collapsing realities, searching for patterns hidden across centuries, looking for one event that exists before every major catastrophe. At first, every timeline appears completely different. Different leaders, different wars, different inventions, different heroes, but eventually, one anomaly keeps appearing again and again. One historical event refuses to disappear no matter how far he traces reality backward. One point where the branches begin multiplying beyond control. One decision that quietly echoes across the entire multiverse. And when every calculation, every magical observation, and every timeline map finally converges on the same answer, Victor Von Doom sees something that changes everything he believes about history. The origin isn't hidden somewhere in his own century. It isn't the first incursion. It isn't Kang. It isn't even the birth of the multiverse itself. The trail leads back over 1,000 years to one planet, one team, and one mission carried out by people who never realized the weight of what they had done. Earth 616, the Avengers, and the moment they chose to travel through time during the events of Avengers Endgame. For most people, that conclusion would sound impossible. The Avengers were the heroes who saved the universe. Billions of lives exist because they succeeded. Entire civilizations owe their survival to the sacrifice they made against Thanos. Every history book in the MCU would remember them as legends. But Victor Von Doom isn't reading history from the perspective of the 21st century. He's reading it from centuries beyond it. He's looking backward through an endless chain of consequences that nobody living in 2023 could possibly see. To him, the time heist isn't remembered as a heroic mission. It's remembered as the first fracture, the first disturbance in a timeline that had remained stable until humanity decided it could rewrite history itself. And once that possibility became real, reality was never truly the same again. Every branch that followed created another possibility. Every possibility created another future. Every future increased the pressure on the multiverse. Eventually, the burden became too great for existence to sustain. Doom isn't watching one mistake. He's watching 1,000 years of dominoes falling one after another, all beginning with a decision made by people who believed they were doing the right thing. That's what makes this theory so compelling. It doesn't require the Avengers to actually be wrong. In fact, they probably weren't. From their point of view, they had no other choice. Half the universe had been erased. Time travel was the only path left. Tony Stark didn't build the quantum tunnel because he wanted to play with history. He built it because billions of innocent lives depended on it. Steve Rogers didn't volunteer for the mission because he wanted to reshape the timeline. He did it because saving people has always been who he is. Bruce Banner believed the rules of time travel would prevent paradoxes. Every decision made during Endgame came from hope, sacrifice, and responsibility. None of them intended to damage the multiverse. None of them could have predicted what Loki's escape would eventually trigger. That's the tragedy. History doesn't always judge people by their intentions. Sometimes it judges them by consequences they never lived long enough to witness. And if Doom truly exists centuries beyond them, then he's looking at consequences so distant that the original motivations barely matter anymore. Imagine discovering that your children, your grandchildren, and every generation after them only existed because your civilization survived thousands of years of hardship, only to be erased by an event that happened before your ancestors were even born. That's the scale of what Doom could be facing. This isn't simply about losing a kingdom. It's about watching an entire future disappear. Families vanish before they ever exist. Cultures are erased. Scientific discoveries never happen. Histories collapse into nothing because universes themselves stop surviving long enough to reach that point. Doom doesn't lose a battle. He loses tomorrow, over and over again. Every incursion destroys another piece of the future he spent centuries building. Entire worlds that once traded knowledge with his empire suddenly cease to exist. Allies disappear. Records become meaningless because the civilizations they described have already been consumed. Even victories become temporary because another collision is always approaching. Eventually, Doom reaches a terrifying realization. He's no longer fighting individual incursions. He's fighting a disease spreading through reality itself. Naturally, his next question becomes the only one that matters. If the future is collapsing because of a chain reaction that began centuries ago, can the chain itself be broken? Most heroes would answer that question by trying to save every universe. That's exactly what makes them heroes. They search for solutions that preserve everyone. Doom doesn't think like that. He never has. His mind has always been brutally mathematical. If infinite branching timelines are creating infinite opportunities for incursions, then maybe the multiverse itself has become the problem. Maybe reality isn't meant to support endless variations forever. Maybe every additional branch increases instability. Every new universe becomes another potential collision waiting to happen. If that's true, then preserving every timeline isn't saving existence, it's accelerating its destruction. That's the kind of conclusion only someone like Victor Von Doom would reach. Cold, logical, merciless, but from his perspective, completely rational. And that's the moment where his philosophy begins separating from every hero we've ever followed. The Avengers see infinite lives worth protecting. Doom sees infinite disasters waiting to happen. Doctor Strange sees endless possibilities across the multiverse. Doom sees endless variables that can never be controlled. Reed Richards would probably spend centuries searching for a scientific solution capable of saving every reality. Doom would ask a far simpler question. What if there was only one reality left? At first, that sounds horrifying. It sounds like the dream of a conqueror obsessed with absolute power. But look at it from his perspective. If universes only collide because there are countless universes, then removing those universes also removes the collisions. No competing realities, no branching timelines, no incursions, one stable existence, one civilization, one future that can actually survive. Suddenly, what looked like tyranny starts resembling desperate damage control. Doom isn't trying to create perfection because he enjoys ruling. He's trying to eliminate the very mechanism that's destroying everything he loves. That's where Battleworld transforms from a comic book concept into something emotionally meaningful. Fans usually imagine Battleworld as Doom's ultimate kingdom, a place where he sits on a throne while everyone else obeys him. But what if that's only how it appears from the outside? What if, to Victor Von Doom, Battleworld is something entirely different? Not a monument to his ego, but an emergency shelter built from the ruins of dying realities. Imagine watching universe after universe collapse until you realize saving all of them is impossible. The only option left is gathering whatever survives before it's too late. Fragments of worlds, pieces of civilizations, the last remaining versions of entire histories. Merge them together into one controlled existence before everything disappears forever. Is it cruel? Absolutely. Does it erase countless realities? Without question. But from Doom's perspective, the alternative isn't freedom. The alternative is extinction. If every universe continues existing independently, eventually none of them survive. Battleworld becomes his final attempt to preserve something instead of losing everything. That idea becomes even more interesting when you compare it to what Loki accomplished at the end of his own journey. For years, Loki chased a throne because he believed power would finally give his life meaning. Then, Marvel completely redefined his character. Instead of ruling over people, Loki chose to hold together the branches of existence itself. He became the guardian of infinite timelines. Every branch was allowed to live. Every possibility deserved a chance to exist. Freedom became the foundation of the new multiverse. It was one of the most hopeful endings Marvel has ever written. But hope depends entirely on perspective. Because somewhere, centuries in the future, another man studies those same branches and sees something completely different. Where Loki sees life, Doom sees instability. Where Loki sees possibility, Doom sees chaos. Where Loki believes every timeline deserves to exist, Doom believes every additional timeline increases the probability that all of them eventually die. Neither philosophy is random. Both are internally consistent. Both genuinely believe they're protecting existence. They simply disagree on what existence should look like. That's why their conflict has the potential to become one of Marvel's greatest ideological wars instead of another battle between good and evil. Think about it. Neither side is motivated by revenge. Neither side is chasing wealth. Neither side is trying to impress anyone. Loki sacrificed everything to give reality freedom. Doom sacrifices everything trying to save reality from that very freedom. They're fighting over the same multiverse while standing at opposite ends of the same argument. One believes life only has meaning when every possibility can exist. The other believes survival only becomes possible when limitless possibilities finally end. Freedom versus order. Chaos versus control. Infinite futures versus one protected future. Suddenly, Doctor Doom isn't simply opposing the Avengers, he's opposing the very principle on which the post-Loki multiverse now exists. And that's exactly why he may never consider himself the villain of this story. Think about the greatest antagonists the MCU has ever created. The ones audiences still talk about years later all had one thing in common. They never believed they were evil. Killmonger believed he was correcting centuries of injustice. The High Evolutionary believed he was forcing evolution toward perfection. And Thanos genuinely convinced himself that genocide was an act of mercy. That's what made them memorable. Their actions were horrifying, but their motivations followed a logic that, from their own perspective, felt impossible to ignore. Doctor Doom could become the next evolution of that idea. Because unlike Thanos, he isn't trying to prevent a future that might happen. He's trying to undo a future he has already lived through. Every incursion, every collapsing universe, every person he failed to save, those aren't predictions to him, they're memories. He carries them the same way the Avengers carried the memory of the blip. When he looks at Earth 616, he doesn't see the birthplace of Earth's mightiest heroes. He sees the place where the countdown began. That also explains why Doom's first instinct wouldn't be to invade Earth for the sake of conquest. Conquering the 21st century accomplishes nothing if history keeps moving toward the same catastrophic destination. Killing the Avengers out of anger accomplishes nothing either. Another version of those events could still unfold. Another branch could still form. If Doom truly believes the problem is rooted in the timeline itself, then his objective becomes far more precise. He has to rewrite the first domino before the rest of them can fall. Not because he hates the Avengers, but because he believes they unknowingly poisoned the future. In his mind, he's a surgeon trying to remove the source of an infection before it spreads any further. The surgery itself may be brutal. It may destroy countless lives in the present. But Doom has already accepted a terrible equation: sacrifice one era, or lose every era. And once someone reaches that conclusion, almost any action becomes justifiable. Now imagine how impossible that argument would be for the Avengers to accept. How do you convince people that saving half the universe was actually the beginning of a disaster that wouldn't fully unfold for another 1,000 years? Steve Rogers would never have accepted letting billions stay dead just to preserve an unknown future. Tony Stark would never have looked at his daughter and decided she wasn't worth saving because of consequences someone centuries later might face. Bruce Banner, Scott Lang, Natasha Romanoff, every single one of them would still make the same choice again. That's what makes heroes different. They save the people standing in front of them, even if tomorrow remains uncertain. Doom sees that philosophy as dangerously short-sighted. The Avengers see Doom's philosophy as unforgivably cruel. Neither side is arguing over facts. They're arguing over responsibility across time itself. And if Marvel chooses this direction, then one of the biggest reveals in the Multiverse saga may not be that the Avengers made a mistake. The reveal could be that they never made one at all. Doom simply believes they did. That distinction changes everything. Because if the audience learns that Doom's entire war is built on a misunderstanding, then he instantly becomes more tragic. Imagine dedicating centuries to solving the greatest mystery in existence, tracing every collapse back through history only to arrive at a conclusion that feels absolutely undeniable and still be wrong. Or perhaps even worse, only partially right. Maybe the time heist wasn't the true cause. Maybe it only exposed a weakness that already existed. Maybe Loki's decision to preserve every branch wasn't the disease, but merely the moment the disease became visible. Marvel could reveal that the multiverse was always heading toward this crisis, with the Avengers simply becoming the first people Doom could blame. From his perspective, the evidence still points directly at them. His conclusion remains emotionally real, even if reality itself is more complicated. That kind of storytelling would also preserve the legacy of Endgame. It wouldn't retroactively turn the Avengers into villains, and it wouldn't cheapen Tony Stark's sacrifice. Instead, it would show how history can be interpreted differently depending on where someone stands. We already experience that in the real world. The same historical event can be remembered as liberation by one generation and catastrophe by another. Both groups inherit different consequences. Both believe their version is the truth. Doom is separated from the Avengers by centuries of cause and effect. The world he inherited is completely different from the world they saved. Of course, he reaches a different conclusion. He's judging history from the finish line while they made their choices at the starting point. Neither side possesses the full picture. And that may be the reason Marvel chose Doctor Doom to replace Kang as the central force of the multiverse saga. Kang represented endless timelines competing for dominance. His war was about who controlled time. Doom's conflict could be much more personal, much more emotional, much more philosophical. Instead of asking, who rules the multiverse? The story becomes, is infinite freedom actually sustainable? That's a far richer question because there isn't an obvious answer. The audience can understand why Loki protected every branch. They can also understand why Doom believes those same branches are slowly destroying reality. Suddenly, the final war isn't simply about stopping a villain before he conquers the universe. It's about deciding what kind of universe deserves to survive in the first place. That brings us back to Battleworld, because if this theory is even partially true, then Battleworld isn't the end of Doom's plan. It's the proof that he has already accepted the death of the multiverse. By the time Battleworld exists, Doom has stopped believing infinite realities can be saved. His goal isn't restoration anymore, it's preservation. He gathers what remains, fuses fragments into one controlled existence, and removes the very thing he believes caused the Crisis Unlimited branching. In his ideal future, there are no alternate versions of people making different choices, no endless realities colliding, no infinite variables threatening everything he built. There is only one reality, one history, one civilization, and one ruler responsible for keeping it alive. To everyone else, that's absolute dictatorship. To Victor Von Doom, it's the only future that still has a future. Whether Marvel ultimately tells this exact story remains to be seen. There are no official leaks confirming it. There are no announcements proving that Doom comes from centuries ahead of the current timeline. But when you line up the pieces that already exist, the time heist in Endgame, Loki's escape with the Tesseract, the fall of He Who Remains, the birth of an unrestricted multiverse, the concept of Incursions, and the inevitable arrival of Battleworld, they form a chain that feels surprisingly coherent. Every link naturally connects to the next. More importantly, they create a version of Doctor Doom who isn't just another conqueror chasing power. They create a man chasing something infinitely more human, a future where his family still exists, a civilization that took centuries to build, a world he refuses to watch disappear, no matter what history has to be rewritten to save it. And if that's the direction Marvel is heading, then the multiverse saga may never have been building toward a battle between heroes and a villain. It may have been building toward a collision between two completely different visions of hope. Loki believed hope meant giving every timeline a chance to live. Doom believes hope means ensuring at least one timeline survives. Somewhere between those two philosophies lies the fate of the MCU itself. If you enjoyed this theory and want more deep dives like this, don't forget to like the video, share it with another Marvel fan, and subscribe to MovieCast for more cinematic MCU breakdowns. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, you can do it with a $25 super thanks. It genuinely helps us keep making videos like this. Until next time, thanks for watching.